Well, we are now done. Stay two. What can I say? At It's been a great semester, and I really feel that you guys had a lot of enthusiasm in this class. Um, it was great, and I'm gonna miss you guys. Like really. Um, you know, it's tough to keep up with the schedules that many of you are dealing with, and I really want to commend you all for that. So, you know, kudos to you. In regards to the exam, it's pretty straightforward. It's not that hard. As I've mentioned to you, it's pretty much if you've got if this far, um, you're fine. And in fact, you may not need the points for the exam or for all the points. I'll leave that up to you. I do ask that you just kind of send me a little message, something saying, "Hey, I'm not going to do the exam," and then I'll just give you the points. If you have an A, you have an A. I won't take it personal, but that's for you to decide. Ultimately, the instructions are straightforward, and you're used to writing the kind of papers that I've asked, and I think that you should realize I'm not changing my grading standards. So yeah, I just want to make that clear. Now, on this last assignment that I had, where you watched the Neil Ferguson documentary, I haven't graded everybody's papers yet, but I really have enjoyed reading your guys' thoughts on the documentary, and I kind of just want to make a few comments about this to end these thoughts on. Many of you, I think, felt a little confused as to exactly what his point was or what was controversial about it. I mean, he didn't make a lot of overt statements, or sometimes he may have, but you didn't quite catch it. It's very subtle still, nonetheless. But he's and you didn't see. I didn't ask you to watch all the other documentaries where he's building up to make a case for an opinion about why the West rose to power, and what made it great, why it's the greatest, and why it needs to not take certain things for granted to keep itself ahead of the game in the world, compared to places like China, for example. Now, so first of all, regardless of whatever you thought about the video and what his bias was, I'm kind of wondering, a lot of you, if you would have watched this documentary without having this assignment, would have you actually thought of it actually trying to promote a certain idea in your head about history? Because he's certainly doing that. I mean, one student pointed out how when he spoke of the West, his voice tone would kind of like go up in a certain way and sound positive, and then China, he kind of had a little mocking sound. Now, you may not agree with that, but I think he does do that. Now, the point is that each documentary, every time a historian is telling you a story, they are promoting a certain amount of bias. I do it myself at times, but I try. I think the way that we can be nuanced as instructors is to say, well, some people have said this, and pointing out that there's been different ways to look at a particular event, right? So, for example, the majority of scholarly U.S. historians believe that the U.S. Civil War really was about slavery. The South culturally tends to not believe that, and even many people in the North. And there are some historians in the South who argue that it wasn't about slavery. So, and they have a PhD, much smarter than I am on the subject. Yet, it seems to me that the consensus view has held up for a reason, that in fact that was the case. Now, so that's how history works. And so when you're watching someone give a point of view to explain why the world is the way it is, you should always, always, always be skeptical. Here's an interesting story. I had this professor at UC Santa Cruz when I was getting my bachelor's in history, and he's Indian American, Bengali particularly, and his specialty was Asian studies, okay, Far East. He knew like 1,000 million languages. It's crazy. But anyways, he was telling us in our group that at the time he was studying under a relatively famous professor of Chinese history. I believe it was at Harvard, one of the big Ivy League schools. And prior to the communist takeover of China, he said that there was a kind of a consensus view. Well, no. Let me reframe it. After the communists took over, that's what it was. After the communists took over China, the American government, according to him, was shocked. How did we lose China? And why did China go commie, right? And they donated quite a bit of money to the Asian History Department for historians to try to figure out like what went wrong basically with China, or how did this happen, okay? And Dr. Basu said that the conclusion that many of the historians had was that it was because of Confucianism that China, kind of lost touch with reality and did something as crazy as become communist. Now, I'm paraphrasing. They didn't put it that silly of a way, but you get what I'm saying. And kind of in the way that Neil Ferguson pointed out that there was an issue with Confucianism as a problem for China. But then he said, the irony is that when all of a sudden China started escalating economically and they switched over to capitalism, there was a question, well, what made China change, and what's going on with China? And he said that then there were certain historians that started saying that the Confucianist legacy helped lead Chinese people to the success that they're at as they're now becoming a superpower. So what he's trying to say is that some historians have used Confucianism as a way to explain why China ended up what they thought was in a negative way, and then they've used it to try to like explain why that they are doing more successful. What's my point? That historians can't find a scientific way to always prove why the world ends up the way it does. We can look at things and patterns and make a conclusion, right? So why did the West end up rising to prominence in the world? Is it because of our qualities and all these things, or what were all these different factors? Some of you in your papers really pinpointed really well, the fact that things like slavery and other things are not really being addressed by him. And the other question is, what makes something the best? I mean, I thought about this kind of illustration. I mean, let's take a look at the Clintons. I wouldn't normally pick on people's marriages, but they're public figures and whatever. We all know that Bill Clinton, when he was president, cheated on his wife. And they are still together as a couple. Now, they've been married for a long time. Now, would you call that a successful marriage? I mean, he goes out and speaks up on behalf of her, trying to help her become president. We know that he cheated on her more than once. I mean, I, for instance, am divorced. I haven't been married that long, but I never cheated on my wife. Many of my exes like me. What is my quality as a person? Am I, this Bill Clinton, a better husband than I was? You see what I'm saying? What? Now, some might say, oh, they're just having a marriage to help promote each other's politics. We don't know that officially right now, right? So in other words, what makes something successful? It's a debatable thing. So do the Clintons have a successful marriage just because it's been lasting this long? And that's like a big debate, right? So what, when you say something's the best, what do we mean by that? When you say somebody rose to power and it was good, under what means? And can it still be good even if it's under very harsh means? I mean, there's just a lot of things, historians really do play the role of philosopher a lot of times, and I just kind of want you to see how that operates, and just look at and think about like how far in some of Western civilization and the way that we would write about history in the past. I have this book right here from the 19th century, and my collection is called Peoples and Places Here and There, Volume 2 of India. It's written in published in Boston, 1892, and this is written for children. And this is referring to some of the Aryan, I think, invasion of India, one of the tribes there in ancient past. And notice how they wrote this history for children to read. It said, "Then the wild natives began to look upon their conquerors with respect and reverence, and gradually the Tartar civilization was brought into India. And the natives gradually changed from the wild animals that they had been into something which, though still a very low type of the human race, was nevertheless a step upward and onward. They began now to have a shadowy sense of home and family, and of respect for each other's rights to life and property." Whoa. This was a history book for children to read. I would like you to see this big book. I have several volumes. This is also from the 19th century, this textbook. Great Men and Famous Women. Okay? In several volumes. Yeah, not great men and women. Only men can be great, and women at best can be famous. So we look at the different way that over time historians have put things out. And so I hope that you just kind of think about that, and that's what I wanted you to do with the video, regardless of what your thought of his bias. So, I think Western civilization is very interesting. And for me, it's where most of my ancestors, if not all of them, have come from. It's my own ethnic background. It's these events in all these countries may have affected some of my ancestors that somehow survived all this chaos. And some of you might come from other places where that we're not from that part of the world. I mean, so all of us, have different sets of reasons why we embrace or repel ourselves from certain histories. I hope that, for this class, that you really are inspired to go beyond just what we have been reading and watching and discussing, and continue to show interest in the entire world. As the poet John Donne said, I'm paraphrasing, "No man is an island but a piece of a continent." And I think that with that perspective, we really become the true enriched human beings that I hope that college helps create. And so, having said that, thanks again for the semester. Have the great rest of your summer, and a great life if I don't hear from you again. But if I ever do see you, I'll buy you a beer. And if you don't drink beer, coffee. And if not that, okay, I'm just going to stop. All right. Take care.